if you're from the developed country, I cannot say anything about that. But if I am from a developing country, which is where I'm from, I value gender. To me, gender, that's why we're fighting for gender within climate change, because if you understand the context of gender within climate change, it means both men and women and how they can adapt to climate change. That's why it's so important for me in the Pacific Island to ensure that our men and our women both have the capacity to cope with the impacts of climate change. That's why we're pushing and ensuring that gender responsive policies and initiatives are captured in the Pacific Islands. So what we do, well, apart from being at the negotiations, UNFCCC negotiations on climate change, sitting there with my government, I also work on ensuring there's a lot of advocacy and lobbying within the region to ensure that whatever policies and initiatives that come about for the Pacific capture and value gender. When I say gender, I mean value the equal participation of men and women. It doesn't mean in numbers. It means that both have the freedom to be part of any initiative or any decision making, or valued at the same level within the Pacific. Because, you know, this is climate change. It's not something else. It is climate change. And climate change means a lot of global warming. So it is very interesting for me when I discuss gender with others. Some discuss it as a disaster risk reduction. Some talk about women's rights. But to me, we must not lose focus of the fact that we're discussing gender within the context of climate change. My role really is to making sure it's a huge network that we have. We are a network of academics. My background is media, so I'm a journalist. We have academics, we have lawyers, we have researchers, we have planters, we have farmers, all making sure that when whatever comes to us for climate change adaptation, we will have equal benefit, or those that are in the islands, that are back home in the Pacific Islands, will have equal access to decision making. You know, sometimes it's quite difficult to discuss this with someone from another world, because they can talk about gender, but they don't know what it means when it hits the ground. You see, if there is to be a solar-powered water desalinator, we have a lot of seawater. So if you desalinate, if you convert this, or if you do some sort of desalination and you get fresh water, okay, a woman in the islands would be able to tell you where is the best place to place this machine, because she knows that every day she will have to feed the family. Every day she'll have to get water for the invalids and for the babies and for the young ones. If they tell you where to place it, you'll have a good idea why we should have gender. Or if there is to be underground water, where can you tap? There could be some various options around. But if we get the perspective of women, also as perspectives of men, into how things should be done, you'll get very interesting and some very valuable answers and contribution to decision making. Gender, you know, in the Pacific is so important, because we know when the funds hit the ground, when adaptation funds hit the ground, they will have impact, and good impact on the ground, because the decisions were made by both our men and our women on how this money should be used. And in the islands, we don't only have villages. I live in the village, but I also have friends and families that live in the cities, in the other island countries. They live in the cities. We should also consider them. If you look in the Pacific Islands, very beautiful islands, tourism is a huge backbone in most of our economies. And when you have no longer just cyclones, when you have king tides, when you have high mean tide, and you have waves crashing into hotels. And when you have cyclones that damage hotels, the effects are just unbelievable, because, you know, a mother will go without work, a father will go without work for a few days, but the hotel may be able to have some sort of support from government to rebuild, and they can pay later. But the mother and the father and the mother working will find it hard. You know, for 3 months without work, how do you do this? So if they are part of decision making, they'll be able to say, okay, we sometimes run out of employment simply because the hotel's down, but there's money to restructure, and hoteliers can pay the loan later. But for me, I need some money to feed my family. And only those that are on the ground will be able to feel this. And you look into the cities, it's different. You know, please don't get me wrong. Gender is about men and women. It has to be seen that way. It has, within the context of climate change, we must value both men and women. They must have equal participation, meaning, to me personally, they must have the freedom to be part of decision making. When we discuss technologies, when we discuss funding, when we discuss initiatives for the Pacific Islands, men and women should be part of this.